What if your excuses are the only thing standing between you and the life you want to live? That's a question that cuts straight to the core of why so many of us feel stuck, why we delay, hesitate, or convince ourselves that tomorrow will be the day we finally take action. But here's the truth. 2,000 years ago, one of history's greatest minds, Marcus Aurelius, confronted this same human tendency head-on. As a Roman emperor and a Stoic philosopher, he didn't just ponder these ideas, he lived them. His journals, filled with raw honesty, reveal a man who refused to let excuses dictate his choices, even amid war, betrayal, and unimaginable pressure. And that's exactly what we're diving into today, the timeless Stoic principles that teach us how to silence the voice of complaint and replace it with unshakable accountability. Think about the last time you told yourself, "I'll start when things calm down," or "I'm just not ready yet." These aren't facts, they're stories we create to avoid discomfort, and Stoicism dismantles them with brutal clarity. The ancient Stoics didn't see obstacles as roadblocks, they saw them as the path itself. Every challenge was an invitation to grow stronger, wiser, more resilient. And here's the surprising part. This isn't about suppressing emotions or white-knuckling your way through life. It's about recognizing that you have the power to choose your response, no matter what chaos the world throws your way. That's the essence of no excuses, a mindset shift that transforms victims into warriors of their own destiny. So why does this matter now, in a world of constant distractions and endless reasons to procrastinate? Because the stakes are higher than ever. Every excuse you entertain is a tiny surrender, a delay that compounds over time into regret. But imagine what's possible if you stop waiting for perfect conditions and start acting with the determination of someone who refuses to be sidelined by their own doubts. This video isn't just about theory, it's a toolkit for reclaiming agency. We'll explore how to cultivate discipline like Marcus Aurelius, reframe setbacks as fuel, and build a life where excuses no longer hold the reins. The journey starts here, and it begins with a single choice: to show up fully, unapologetically, and without excuses. Let's begin. The Stoics had a radical view of accountability, one that flips everything we're taught about blame on its head. Imagine two people stuck in the same traffic jam. One grips the wheel, fuming at the cars around them, convinced the universe is out to ruin their day. The other takes a deep breath, uses the delay to listen to an audiobook, and arrives calm. Same situation, completely different experience. That's the core of Stoic philosophy. External events don't control your peace or progress, your judgments do. Epictetus, a former slave who became one of Stoicism's most influential teachers, put it bluntly: "It's not what happens to you, but how you react." He wasn't dismissing hardship, he was highlighting a profound truth. Every time we point fingers at circumstances, the economy, our upbringing, bad luck, we hand over our power. The Stoics called this self-sabotage. Modern life thrives on excuses. We blame slow Wi-Fi for missed deadlines, toxic coworkers for our bad moods, or not having time for the goals we claim to care about. But here's what changes when you embrace Stoic accountability. You stop waiting for the world to bend to your wishes and start focusing on what you can influence. Think of it like sailing. You can't control the wind, but you can adjust your sails. Marcus Aurelius faced rebellions, plagues, and betrayal, yet his journals reveal a man who held himself responsible for his own tranquility. "You have power over your mind, not outside events," he wrote. "Realize this and you will find strength." So where does this hit home for you? Maybe it's that project you've postponed, blaming a lack of resources. Or the strained relationship where you're convinced the other person needs to change first. The exercise is simple but uncomfortable. Pick one area where you've been deflecting responsibility. Now ask, what if the obstacle isn't the thing out there? It's the story I'm telling myself about it. That shift doesn't just dissolve excuses, it reveals hidden agency. When you stop seeing yourself as a passenger in your own life and start acting as the driver, everything changes. The traffic jam isn't gone, but now you're the one choosing whether it steals your peace or becomes time to think. That's the Stoic edge, reclaiming the power you never actually lost. Seneca, one of Stoicism's sharpest minds, cracked open a powerful truth. Most of our suffering comes from confusing what we can control with what we can't. Picture a ship's captain. She doesn't waste breath cursing the wind or raging against the waves. She knows storms are beyond her command, but the rudder, the sails, the course she charts, that's where her power lies. This isn't just nautical wisdom, it's a blueprint for living. Yet how often do we exhaust ourselves fighting tides we'll never tame? We obsess over delays at the airport, gossip from coworkers, even the weather, as if frustration could bend reality to our will. Stoicism calls this the inversion of energy, and it's the reason so many people feel drained before they've even begun. Here's the breakthrough. When you stop pouring effort into the uncontrollable, you free up reserves for what actually matters. Think of a gardener who spends hours yelling at clouds instead of tending the soil. The crops won't grow from his outrage, but they might thrive if he redirects that energy to watering, weeding, adjusting. Seneca put it bluntly, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. The coworker who takes credit for your ideas, uncontrollable. How you prepare, document, and assert your worth, that's your rudder, the traffic jam that makes you late. Uncontrollable, leaving earlier or using the time to call a loved one, that's your sail. So let's make this practical. Grab a notebook and divide a page into 2 columns. Label 1, storms, the things you complain about but can't change. The other, rudder. For 1 week, every time frustration bubbles up, pause. Ask, is this a storm I'm cursing or a sail I could adjust? At first, it'll feel uncomfortable. We're wired to blame outside forces, it protects our ego. But here's what happens when you practice this. The storms haven't vanished, but you stop drowning in them. You begin spotting gaps where your agency was hiding all along. That project you've delayed because the team isn't motivated enough. Maybe the real leverage is your ability to clarify goals or inspire through action. The anxiety about a future you can't predict. Perhaps the power lies in preparing skills today rather than fretting over tomorrow's unknowns. This isn't about passive acceptance, it's about strategic focus. The captain who fixates on the storm sinks. The one who studies the map steers clear of reefs and trims the sails, she reaches port. Seneca's distinction is your anchor in a world obsessed with control. When you stop fighting waves and start mastering navigation, something shifts. You become the calm in the chaos, not because life got easier, but because you finally learned where to place your hands. Marcus Aurelius left us a phrase that cuts through centuries of excuses like a blade. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. At first glance, it sounds contradictory. How can a roadblock double as a path forward? But this isn't just philosophical wordplay. It's a battle-tested strategy for turning adversity into advantage. Consider Wilma Rudolph, the Olympic sprinter who contracted polio as a child and was told she'd never walk again. Doctors saw a body broken by disease. She saw a challenge to rebuild herself stronger. Years later, she didn't just walk, she sprinted to 3 gold medals. Her childhood leg braces traded for medals. That's the Stoic mindset in motion. When you stop seeing obstacles as stop signs and start treating them as training grounds, everything changes. This principle isn't reserved for legends. It plays out in quiet, everyday moments too. The writer who uses rejection letters to sharpen their voice. The entrepreneur whose failed product launch reveals a gap in the market. Even nature follows this rule. Forest fires that seem destructive actually clear space for new growth. The Stoics understood this pattern deeply. When barbarians threatened Rome's borders, Marcus Aurelius didn't wallow in fear. He used the crisis to drill his focus, writing, "The blazing fire makes flames and brightness out of everything thrown into it." That's the alchemy of resilience, taking whatever life hurls at you, setbacks, delays, even betrayals, and using them as raw material for your next breakthrough. So how do we apply this when life feels like it's working against us? Start by interrogating your obstacle like a Stoic would. That project derailed by unexpected budget cuts. Instead of fixating on the financial gap, ask, what skills can I develop by finding creative solutions with limited resources? The toxic colleague draining your energy, view them as a mirror exposing where you need stronger boundaries or emotional detachment. Even physical limitations can become teachers. A runner sidelined by injury might discover yoga, uncovering flexibility they'd never have pursued at full speed. The key lies in shifting from "why is this happening to me" to "what is this trying to reveal or strengthen in me?" This isn't about toxic positivity or pretending hardship doesn't hurt. The Stoics weren't masochists, they were realists who recognized that pain often carries wisdom if we're willing to unpack it. Your current struggle, yes, that one you're tempted to complain about right now, holds hidden leverage. Maybe it's forcing you to innovate where you'd grown complacent, or teaching patience where you'd rushed. Marcus Aurelius faced plague, war, and betrayal, yet his journals reveal a man who mined each crisis for its lesson. The willing are led by fate, the reluctant dragged. Today's obstacle isn't your enemy, it's your unexpected coach drilling you in the very skills your next chapter requires. The question isn't whether you'll face impediments, it's whether you'll let them harden you or hone you. There's a hidden cost to every "I'll do it later," a quiet erosion of trust in yourself. Epictetus, the Stoic teacher who transformed his enslavement into a masterclass on inner freedom, saw this clearly. He didn't mince words. You're not disturbed by events, but by your judgments about them. And what's procrastination if not a judgment that future you will magically have more courage, time, or motivation? The Stoics called this out as self-deception. They practiced something far more potent, the discipline of action, doing now what's within your power, while fully aware that now is all you're guaranteed. Here's where ancient wisdom meets modern productivity. Time blocking isn't just a calendar trick, it's a Stoic exercise in mortality awareness. The Romans had a phrase for this, memento mori, remember you must die. It sounds stark, but when Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You could leave life right now, let that determine what you do," he wasn't being morbid, he was highlighting urgency as a compass. Imagine structuring your day with this lens. That project you've sidelined, block 90 minutes today, not someday. The difficult conversation you're avoiding. Schedule it before lunch. This isn't about fear, it's about clarity. Death isn't stalking your calendar, it's reminding you that postponing meaningful action is the real theft. Let's make this tangible. Grab your phone and set a timer for 5 minutes. In that window, identify one task you've delayed, not because it's hard logistically, but because it stirs discomfort. Maybe it's sending that pitch, starting the workout, or apologizing. Now, here's the Stoic challenge. What if this were your last chance to do it, not as a hypothetical, but as truth? The barrier isn't time, it's the story you've attached to the action. The pitch feels risky because you've equated rejection with failure. The workout's delayed because you've made comfort more sacred than strength. Procrastination is fear in disguise, and the antidote isn't motivation. It's surgically dismantling the illusion that delay makes things easier. Epictetus trained his students to confront this head-on. If you want to improve, be content to appear clueless or stupid. That's the hidden power of acting now. When you send the imperfect draft or take the first run despite feeling out of shape, you're not just completing a task, you're rewiring your relationship with resistance. Time blocking becomes a memento viva, a reminder to live, Each reserved slot is a pact with your future self. I won't abandon you to the myth of later, because later is where dreams go to gather dust, and the Stoics knew a truth we often forget. The perfect moment is the one you choose to act. Seneca saw something in human nature that still haunts us today, the way complaints act like leaks in a boat, slowly sinking us while we barely notice. He wrote to his friend Lucilius with startling urgency, "How much time you lose to mourning misfortunes instead of repairing them." That question lands differently when you realize Seneca wasn't just theorizing. This was a man who faced exile, chronic illness, and eventual execution by Emperor Nero, yet his letters reveal someone who treated grievance like a poison. Not because he denied suffering, but because he understood its real cost. Every moment spent cursing the dark is a moment not spent lighting a candle. Fast forward to today, and we've turned venting into a cultural pastime. The co-worker who drags you into a labyrinth of gossip about management. The social media rant that spirals into hours of outrage. Even harmless-sounding phrases like, "I'm so done," or "this always happens to me," they're not just words, they're micro-sabotages reinforcing a story of powerlessness. The Stoics drew a hard line between acknowledging pain and indulging in it. Picture two teammates handed the same tight deadline. One spends the meeting dissecting why the timeline is unfair. The other asks, "What's the first step we can take right now?" Both face the same challenge, but one is already building an exit ramp from despair. Here's the experiment Seneca would urge you to try. Carry a notepad for a single day and mark a tally each time you complain internally or aloud. Not just the obvious outbursts, but subtle slips too. Sighing about traffic, eye-rolling at a policy change, even joking about your terrible luck. You'll likely shock yourself. Then ask the pivotal question, did any of those complaints change the situation, or did they just drain energy I could have spent adapting? The modern myth is that venting gets it out of your system, but neuroscience tells a different story. Rehashing frustration actually strengthens neural pathways for misery, like wearing a groove into a dirt road until it becomes the only route your thoughts can travel. Workplaces are ground zero for this drain. Water cooler gossip masquerades as team bonding, but study after study shows it erodes trust and productivity. Contrast that with Stoic problem solving. When Epictetus students whined about unfair treatment, he didn't coddle them, he handed them mental tools. If someone tells you the ship's damaged, you don't abandon ship, you find the leak and patch it. That's the pivot from toxic speech to tactical speech. Next time you're tempted to dissect a problem with coworkers, pause. Could this conversation include just one actionable idea? Even shifting from "the new software is terrible" to "what's one shortcut we've discovered" transforms helplessness into agency. The stakes are higher than productivity. Chronic complainers don't just repel opportunities, they train their brains to spot more things to resent. Seneca called it sowing thorns in your own path. Meanwhile, those who habitually seek solutions develop what psychologists call strategic attention, a knack for spotting exits where others see dead ends. This isn't about plastering on a fake smile. It's about recognizing that language isn't just descriptive, it's creative. Every complaint whispers to your subconscious, "You're at the mercy of this." Every solution-focused question declares, "I have leverage here." Your challenge tonight, after tallying those complaints, pick just one recurring grievance. Maybe it's "my commute is exhausting" or "my boss doesn't appreciate me." Now channel Seneca's razor-sharp pragmatism. If you truly can't change the circumstance like traffic, what's one way to change your relationship to it? Audiobooks, leaving earlier. If it's something you can influence, like feeling undervalued, what's one clear, respectful request you could make? Not a vague wish, a specific, actionable step. This is where Stoicism transcends philosophy and becomes a daily rebellion against helplessness. the ship will always spring leaks. The question is whether you reach for a bucket or just curse the water. Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff, not knowing if the fall will break you or teach you to fly. Nietzsche, the philosopher who famously declared amor fati, love of fate, understood this tension deeply. Though not a Stoic himself, he built upon their foundation with a radical twist. Don't just endure what life hands you, embrace it so fully that you'd choose nothing else. This isn't blind optimism, it's a fierce recognition that every twist, even the painful ones, holds the raw materials for your evolution. A decade ago, I met a woman who embodied this. Laid off from a corporate job she'd given her life to, she spent weeks paralyzed by resentment. Then she stumbled on Marcus Aurelius' words, "Accept whatever comes to you woven by the thread of fate." Something clicked. Instead of fighting reality, she asked, "What if this isn't happening to me but for me?" Within a year, she'd launched a business designing ergonomic office gear, something she'd never have pursued without that push into the unknown. The Stoics didn't preach passive surrender. Amor fati is active, a deliberate alignment with life's friction. Think of a blacksmith shaping steel. The hammer's blows aren't punishment, they're what forges strength. Marcus faced this daily. Betrayed by allies, grieving lost children, he wrote, "The cucumber is bitter, throw it away, there are brambles in the path." Go around, you need only say what stands in the way and it ceases to obstruct. His genius lay in reframing. Obstacles weren't injustices to lament but puzzles to solve. That's the heart of loving fate, seeing adversity as a collaborator in your growth rather than an enemy to defeat. Now, bring this into your life with one piercing question. What current struggle feels like an enemy but might actually be an ally in disguise? Maybe it's the financial strain forcing you to audit wasteful spending, the criticism that stings because it highlights a skill gap you've ignored. Even chronic pain can become a teacher, forcing mindfulness where haste once ruled. A friend of mine, after a car accident left him with a limp, discovered Tai Chi. 5 years later, he credits the injury for unlocking a patience and body awareness he'd never cultivated as a restless athlete. The accident didn't change, his relationship to it did. This mindset shift isn't about denying pain, it's about mining it for purpose. The Stoics practiced premeditatio malorum, envisioning worst-case scenarios not to fear them but to disarm their power. When you mentally walk through losing your job, your health, even loved ones, you strip away the illusion that comfort is default. What remains? The unshakable knowledge that you can choose meaning in any circumstance. Viktor Frankl, surviving Auschwitz, wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude." That's amor fati in its most profound form, staring into life's abyss and deciding to love the climb back out. Your challenge today is simple but transformative. Pick one current hardship, a rejection, a limitation, a fear. Now write down 3 ways it might be serving you, not in some distant future but right now. Is the rejection protecting you from a misaligned path? Is the fear highlighting values you've neglected? This isn't spiritual bypassing, it's strategic reframing. The goal isn't to eliminate discomfort but to partner with it, as Marcus scribbled in the dead of night on a military campaign. The mind adapts and converts to its own purposes the obstacle to our acting. The impediment to action advances action. Your greatest setback might be the foundation you've been waiting to build upon, if you dare to stop fighting it and start forging with it. Aristotle's timeless insight that excellence is not an act but a habit holds a mirror to our daily choices, especially the ones we make when no one is watching. Every time we tell ourselves, "I'll start tomorrow," or "it's not the right time," we're not just delaying action, we're sculpting our identity through tiny, repeated surrenders. Modern neuroscience confirms this in startling detail. Each excuse we validate strengthens neural pathways that make passivity feel more natural than discipline. Think of it like hiking through fresh snow. The first time you take a detour to avoid a steep slope, it's a conscious choice. But with every repetition, that detour becomes a well-worn path until eventually it's the only route your brain defaults to. That's the habit loop of excuses in action, a self-reinforcing cycle where avoidance breeds more avoidance. Consider how this plays out in ordinary moments. You hit snooze instead of running, telling yourself you'll go after work. You scroll social media instead of writing, blaming creative block. These aren't isolated lapses, they're bricks in the foundation of who you're becoming. The Stoics saw this clearly. Epictetus warned, "First say to yourself what you would be, then do what you must." There's no gap between identity and action. You don't become a runner by owning sneakers. You become one by running, especially on days when fatigue whispers excuses. Here's where modern habit science offers a lifeline. Researchers at MIT discovered that habits form through a simple loop. Cue, routine, reward. Excuses hijack this system. The cue might be stress or fatigue. The routine is avoidance. The reward is temporary relief from discomfort. But the payoff is a trap. It steals long-term growth for short-term ease. Breaking this cycle starts with awareness. Try a habit audit for 1 week. Carry a notebook and jot down every instance where you notice yourself reaching for an excuse. Not to judge, but to observe patterns. You might spot that "I don't have time" clusters around late afternoons, or "I'm not good enough" creeps in before creative work. Now the pivot, redesign the routine. When the cue hits, say, exhaustion after work, swap "I'm too tired to train" for "I'll move for 10 minutes." The reward isn't a six-pack, it's the pride of showing up. James Clear, author of Atomic Habits, calls this the 2-minute rule, a strategy rooted in Stoic pragmatism. Marcus Aurelius didn't wake up asking how to master the day. He asked what small, necessary thing lay before him. 10 minutes of movement might seem insignificant, but it's a rebellion against the identity of someone who quits at the first hurdle. This isn't about perfection. It's about interruption. Every time you disrupt an excuse with micro-action, you're not just changing behavior, you're rewriting your self-story. The poet Mary Oliver once wrote, "Attention without feeling is merely a report." Your habit audit isn't a cold ledger of failures. It's a map of where your old narratives collide with your potential. That moment you choose 10 minutes over surrender. That's the thread you pull to unravel a lifetime of "I can't." Because the opposite of an excuse isn't motivation, it's a decision, however small, to prove yourself wrong. Fear has a way of shrinking our world, whispering that the unknown is more dangerous than the regret of never trying. The Stoics didn't just confront this instinct, they weaponized it. Seneca's Premeditatio Malorum, the premeditation of evils, wasn't about pessimism. It was a mental fire drill. Imagine standing in a quiet theater when someone yells, "Fire." Chaos erupts because no one rehearsed their exit. But what if you'd mentally walked through the scenario 100 times? That's the Stoic practice. They'd visualize losing their job, their health, even their freedom, not to wallow, but to ask, and then what? By staring down the worst-case scenario, they stripped fear of its power to paralyze. Today, we've swapped this ancient courage for cheap workarounds. Endless scrolling numbs the anxiety of an unfinished project. Binge-watching drowns out the voice asking, "What if I fail?" But distraction is a temporary anesthetic. It doesn't heal the wound of unrealized potential. Contrast this with Seneca, exiled to Corsica under brutal conditions. Instead of fixating on injustice, he wrote, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage." He wasn't romanticizing suffering. He was declaring that acceptance isn't surrender, it's the first step toward agency. When you stop running from fear, you start seeing it for what it really is, a map of where growth waits. Here's the pivotal question most never ask: what's the worst that could happen if you acted despite fear? Not hypothetically, but empirically. That speech you're avoiding might lead to stumbles, but will it kill you? That career leap could bring financial strain, but would it truly destroy you or just force resourcefulness? The Stoics discovered a counterintuitive truth: fear's bark is almost always worse than its bite. A study at the University of California found that 85% of what people worry about never happens, and the remaining 15% is more manageable than anticipated. Yet we live as if the reverse were true. Consider two artists. One hoards her paintings, terrified of criticism. The other posts daily, collecting rejections like data points. A year later, one has a pile of dusty canvases, the other has a following and thick skin. The difference isn't talent, it's their relationship to fear. Epictetus, born into slavery, framed it this way: it's not things that upset us, but our judgments about them. Rejection stings because we attach it to self-worth. Financial insecurity terrifies because we equate it with failure. But what if you practiced premeditatio malorum here? Visualize the worst. Your art flops, your savings dwindle, then ask, could I survive that? Could it even teach me something? Suddenly, fear shifts from a stop sign to a caution sign. Proceed, but with eyes open. Modern psychology backs this. Exposure therapy treats phobias by gradual confrontation, proof that avoidance fuels fear while action defangs it. The Stoics took this further, turning it into a daily discipline. Marcus Aurelius would journal about his own death, not to brood, but to clarify priorities. You could leave life right now, he reminded himself. Let that determine what you do. That's the razor's edge of premeditatio malorum. It's not about expecting disaster, but refusing to let disaster dictate your choices. The entrepreneur who drafts a failure resume, listing lessons from hypothetical setbacks, isn't inviting ruin. They're inoculating themselves against paralysis. So try this tonight. Pick one fear that's been keeping you stuck, the conversation you're dodging, the project you've sidelined. Now walk through the absolute worst outcome in vivid detail. Your pitch gets rejected. Write the rejection email in your voice. Your side hustle flops. Calculate the exact financial impact. Then, and here's the key, script your comeback. How would you adapt? What's plan B? When you realize you'd still be breathing, maybe even wiser, fear loses its fangs, because courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the realization that fear no longer gets to vote. Scrolling through social media today often feels like standing at the edge of a festival you weren't invited to. Everyone else's life appears brighter, fuller, more enviable. But here's what Musonius Rufus, the Stoic teacher who turned exile into a classroom, would tell you. Comparison isn't just a thief of joy, it's a surrender of your sovereignty. He drilled this into his students with unflinching clarity. No man is happy until he thinks he is, not when others approve, not when he outshines his peers. When he roots his worth in something unshakable. 2,000 years later, we're drowning in highlight reels, carefully curated snapshots designed to provoke that exact ache of, why not me? The Stoics saw this coming. They knew the human mind would always measure itself against others unless given a better compass. Consider how this plays out in modern life. You train for a marathon only to see someone post a faster time. You launch a business, then spot a competitor's funding announcement. Even personal milestones get shadowed. Engagement rings seem bigger, vacations more exotic, children more precocious on Instagram than in your living room. But Musonius Rufus would point to a fundamental error here. You're comparing your raw footage to someone else's edited trailer. The Stoics called this externals, placing your value in things outside your control. When your self-worth hinges on outperforming others, you hand them the keys to your emotional state. A promotion doesn't feel like victory if your colleague gets a corner office. 1,000 likes feel hollow when someone else gets 10,000. Breaking this cycle starts with a radical shift, defining success internally. Take a sheet of paper and draw 3 columns. In the first, list 3 strengths entirely independent of others' achievements. Maybe your patience in teaching your niece to ride a bike, your consistency in writing morning pages even when no one reads them, or your ability to stay calm during family conflicts. These aren't measured against anyone, they're intrinsic. The second column, note 3 moments this week when you felt genuine contentment. Sipping tea undisturbed, finishing a book that changed your perspective, listening to a friend without glancing at your phone. These are your real metrics. The third column is where Musonius Rufus would have you focus. Write 1 sentence describing who you'd be if no one was watching, judging, or applauding. That's your unmovable core. This isn't about rejecting ambition, it's about redirecting it. When Serena Williams steps onto the court, she isn't thinking about her opponent's trophies. She's focused on executing her own game plan at the highest level. That's Stoic self-sufficiency in action, rivalry transformed into respect, envy into emulation of qualities you admire. The next time you catch yourself falling into the comparison trap, pause. Ask, is this person's success diminishing mine, or am I letting it obscure my own progress? Social media isn't the enemy. Forgetting where true worth resides is. Musonius Rufus, who taught philosophy in threadbare clothes to prove luxury wasn't necessary for wisdom, left us a final challenge: examine yourself. If you are not yet beautiful, make yourself beautiful with your own actions. No filter required, no likes needed, just the quiet, unshakable knowledge that you're building something no algorithm can quantify, a life measured by depths, not heights. Marcus Aurelius kept a simple rule written in his private journal: waste no more words. At first glance, it sounds like advice about efficiency, but dig deeper and you uncover the Stoic secret to dismantling excuses before they take root. Think about the last time someone asked why a project was late. The avalanche of explanations: the team dropped the ball, the deadline was unrealistic, I was swamped. These aren't just words. They're verbal smoke screens disguising what Stoics called the lie of inaction. Contrast that with a CEO who stands before shareholders after a failed product launch and says simply, I misjudged the market. Here's how we fix it. That's the power of restraint. Every unnecessary word trimmed away leaves only accountability shining through. This principle cuts straight to the heart of why we make excuses in the first place. Speech isn't neutral, it shapes reality. When we claim, I didn't have time, we're not describing a fact, we're constructing an alibi. The Stoics recognized language as the first frontier of self-discipline. Epictetus warned his students, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. A modern parallel: the difference between posting motivational quotes about fitness and actually waking up at 5 a.m. to train. One fills the air with intention, the other fills your life with results. Words unchecked become the wallpaper of avoidance, blending into the background until we stop noticing they're there. Consider 2 managers facing the same missed deadline. One spends the meeting detailing supply chain issues and staffing shortages. The other says, I underestimated the scope. Next time, here's my adjustment. Both may have faced identical obstacles, but the second response does something radical. It converts explanation into ownership. That's the Stoic edge. Silence isn't about suppression, it's about precision. Like a sculptor chipping away excess marble to reveal the statue within, cutting verbal clutter exposes the truth. You always have a choice in how you respond. Marcus didn't journal for applause, he wrote to strip away illusions. His ink was acid-dissolving pretense. So where does this hit home? Start eavesdropping on your own conversations, especially the casual ones. When you tell a friend, I've been meaning to call, pause. Is that true, or is it a softer version of I prioritized other things? When you mutter, traffic made me late, challenge yourself. Could leaving earlier have changed the outcome? This isn't about self-flagellation, it's about upgrading your verbal diet. Just as processed food dulls the body's signals, processed language dulls your sense of agency. The ancient Spartans, influenced by Stoic ideals, trained their youth in laconic speech, using few words to convey much. A king once threatened Sparta, "If I invade, I will burn your fields." The reply, a single word: if practical exercise for one day, conduct a verbal fast. Before speaking, ask, is this necessary? Does it add value or just padding? You'll uncover how often we dress up avoidance as explanation. That text you've delayed sending, busy, might really mean, I'm avoiding an uncomfortable conversation. The gym habit you keep postponing, not enough time, often masks, I haven't made it non-negotiable. Silence, in the Stoic sense, isn't empty, it's the space where excuses dissolve and action takes root. As Seneca wrote, speech is proof of character. What do your words prove about yours? Epictetus lived in a simple clay pot compared to the marble palaces of Rome's elite, yet his words outlasted empires. He scoffed at extravagance not because he lacked opportunity, but because he recognized a paradox: the more we amass, the more we convince ourselves we lack. Modern creators fall into this trap, constantly waiting for the perfect camera, the premium software, the ideal studio space before bringing their vision to life. But history's most enduring art wasn't forged in ideal conditions. Shakespeare penned masterpieces with a quill and candlelight. Beethoven composed symphonies while deaf. The Nigerian film industry, Nollywood, produces thousands of films yearly on shoestring budgets, proving creativity thrives not despite constraints, but because of them. This is Stoic minimalism in action, when Epictetus declared, "Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants." He wasn't preaching poverty, he was revealing a cheat code for resilience. Every excuse about inadequate resources crumbles when you study how ceramicists turn local clay into porcelain, or how street photographers capture soul-stirring images with decade-old cameras. The limitation isn't the tool, it's the belief that the tool dictates the outcome. Take the one-brush challenge adopted by digital artists, creating entire illustrations with a single brush setting. At first it feels stifling, then something shifts. Freed from endless tweaking of options, they discover nuance in restraint. The constraint becomes a creative accelerant. So let's strip this down to your reality. Open your Notes app and list every reason you've postponed a project this year. Equipment, funds, training. Now channel Epictetus, cross out half those items. Not by dismissing them, but by asking, what's the raw minimum needed to begin? A filmmaker lacking a drone might discover powerful ground-level storytelling. An entrepreneur without funding could prototype with free tools like Canva or GarageBand. Even fitness goals, when stripped of gym memberships and gear, boil down to bodyweight movements in a living room. The magic lies in distinguishing between essentials and embellishments. Practical exercise for the next 72 hours. Impose artificial constraints on one endeavor. Write a poem using only one-syllable words. Cook a gourmet meal with 5 ingredients. Draft a business plan on a single napkin. You'll uncover 2 truths. First, that most necessities are really comfort buffers. Second, that scarcity breeds ingenuity. The Japanese aesthetics of wabi-sabi, finding beauty in imperfection, echo this Stoic principle. A cracked bowl isn't discarded, its flaw becomes the focal point. Your perceived deficiencies, whether time, money, or connections, might be the very cracks that give your work its distinctive texture. Epictetus would remind us, the sculptor doesn't complain about the size of the marble block. She asks what form lies hidden within it. Your current constraints aren't blocking your path, they're defining its shape. And that's where true resourcefulness begins, not in waiting for better circumstances, but in recognizing that the best tool you'll ever possess is the mind deciding to use what's already at hand. Every night before bed, Seneca performed a ritual that would put most modern productivity gurus to shame. He didn't scroll through notifications or tally completed tasks. He conducted what Stoics called an evening audit, holding his own choices up to the harshest light. Picture this: a flickering oil lamp, a wax tablet, and one piercing question: where today did I trade my integrity for convenience? This wasn't about self-punishment, it was forensic accountability. In letters to his friend Lucilius, he described finding bits of metal stuck to the soul, those moments when he'd blamed a missed writing session on fatigue, rather than admitting he'd squandered focus on trivial conversations. 2 millennia later, our distractions have upgraded from gossipy neighbors to algorithmic feeds, but the human tendency to dress up avoidance as busyness remains unchanged. Here's the modern twist on Seneca's practice. Instead of parchment, try a voice memo app. There's something about speaking aloud that strips away the polished lies we scribble in journals. When you ask, "Where did I make excuses today?" and hear your own voice hesitate before claiming, "I didn't have time to exercise," the dissonance becomes undeniable. A clinical psychologist I worked with uses this with clients struggling with self-deception. They'll say, "Work was too hectic for family dinner," then play back the recording and realize they skipped dinner prep to fixate on emails that could have waited. Seneca called this holding up a mirror to the soul, not to shame but to recalibrate. "Look inward," he wrote, "within is the fountain of good." But why does this work when other reflection methods fail? Neuroscience offers clues. The brain's default mode network, active during self-reflection, processes spoken language differently than written words. Vocalizing, "I told myself traffic made me late, but I left 15 minutes behind schedule," triggers stronger emotional engagement than typing it. It's why courtroom testimony carries more weight than affidavits. Your own voice played back becomes both witness and judge. One tech CEO I interviewed keeps an excuse log this way. Over months, patterns emerge. Certain triggers, stress, fatigue, spawn predictable deflection scripts. Recognizing them is like seeing the strings on a puppet. Suddenly, you can't unsee who's really pulling them. This ritual isn't about nitpicking failures. Seneca's letters reveal a man who celebrated small victories with equal rigor, found an hour to read despite a chaotic day. That's a sale adjusted, chose water over wine at a networking event to honor health goals. That's steering the rudder. The evening audit balances both scales. Noticing where you reclaimed agency sharpens your ability to spot where you surrendered it. Try layering in a Stoic twist. After identifying an excuse, ask, "What would the version of me I aspire to be have done differently?" Not some perfect ideal, but the next level iteration of yourself. Maybe that version wouldn't have worked out longer, but would have committed fully to 20 minutes instead of half-heartedly scrolling through fitness videos. The magic lies in consistency. Seneca didn't preach daily review because life-altering revelations strike at midnight. He knew truth compounds in tiny increments. Like lifting weights, the exercise only strengthens resolve when practiced regularly. Modern tracking apps might quantify steps or screen time, but they can't measure the moment you chose courage over comfort. That silent victory when you sent the email instead of over-editing it, or when you admitted, "I don't know," instead of bluffing. Those are the deposits that build unshakable self-trust. Tonight, before the glow of your phone replaces Seneca's oil lamp, press record. Ask the questions that matter. Where did I confuse motion for progress today? When did I blame circumstances instead of claiming agency? Listen, not to chastise but to awaken, because the most brutal lies aren't the ones we tell others. They're the ones we whisper to ourselves after the world goes quiet. And the only way to dismantle them is to play them back unedited until the truth rings clear. Cato the Younger never waited for perfect conditions. He created them through sheer force of will. While other Roman senators hesitated, weighing political wins, Cato would stride into the Senate with unwashed hair and bare feet, declaring his position before debate even began. His contemporaries called it stubbornness. History reveals it as genius. By removing the luxury of hesitation, he turned deliberation into decisive action. Fast forward to today, and we've turned delay into an art form. Writers wait for inspiration to strike like lightning. Entrepreneurs stall for market conditions. Even fitness goals get postponed until Monday or next month or after the holidays. But here's what Cotto understood that most miss. Waiting for the perfect moment isn't patience, it's paralysis in disguise. Consider how this plays out in creative work. Two novelists sit at their desks. One stares at a blank screen, waiting for words to arrive polished and profound. The other writes 300 messy words, cliches, half-formed metaphors, even placeholder phrases like describe the sunset better later. At day's end, one has a pristine blank page. The other has raw material to refine. The myth of perfect conditions thrives on a fundamental misconception. That great work emerges fully formed. But Michelangelo didn't find David hidden in the marble. He chiseled away everything that wasn't David. The Stoics framed this as the dichotomy of control. You can't command inspiration, but you can always command action. That daily showing up, that's the chisel. Now let's expose the cost of this waiting game. A study at the University of Pennsylvania tracked two groups of aspiring writers. Group A waited for inspiration to strike before writing. Group B wrote at scheduled times, regardless of motivation. After 6 months, Group B produced not only more work, but work judged more creative by independent editors. The mechanism is simple. Action generates inspiration, not the other way around. Roman architect Vitruvius didn't wake up one morning magically knowing how to design aqueducts. He studied, failed, and iterated until theory became instinct. The irony, what we call preparation, is often just procrastination with a prettier name. Here's your Cotto-worthy challenge. Before this video ends, identify one task you've delayed for ideal circumstances. Not the monumental, life-changing project, the small, nagging action you keep rescheduling. Maybe it's finally setting up that retirement account, having that tough conversation with your roommate, or recording the first clumsy video for your YouTube channel. Now here's the twist. Do it badly, send the awkward email, post the unedited clip, schedule the appointment with half-researched questions. Why? Because imperfection is the antidote to inertia. The Stoics had a term for this, procopton, the person making progress through consistent, incremental effort. Not flawless, not heroic, just moving. The writer Anne Lamott captured this perfectly in her essay, Shitty First Drafts. She recounts watching her novelist father write daily, even when inspiration was conspicuously absent. When she asked why, he simply said, "Because I might as well be standing there when the fish are biting." That's the Stoic edge. Cotto didn't conquer his rivals by waiting for ideal political climates. He showed up and shaped them. Your imperfect action today isn't a compromise, it's a declaration that conditions don't dictate your progress. You do, and somewhere in Rome's ruins, a barefoot senator is nodding in approval. Musonius Rufus didn't just teach Stoicism from a cushioned lecture hall. He dug his hands into the dirt, literally. The philosopher who convinced Rome's elite that manual labor was noble also broke societal norms by training his frail body into endurance. When students complained of fatigue during his infamous long walks, he'd counter, "Is your body a master or a servant?" That question rips through modern excuses like, "I'm not fit enough," with startling precision. Consider Jessica Cox, born without arms, who earned a black belt in Taekwondo using her feet with the same precision others used their hands. Her story isn't about overcoming limitations, it's about redefining what fit enough even means. We've twisted fitness into a cult of aesthetics, equating capability with six-pack abs or marathon times. But the Stoics measured the body differently by its obedience to purpose. Musonius forced his students to sleep on hard ground, not to toughen their backs, but to prove comfort was optional. When you say, "I can't start running until I lose weight," you're not stating fact, you're confessing you've made your body the decision maker. Contrast this with adaptive athletes like Aaron Wheels Fotheringham, who performs backflips in a wheelchair. His equipment isn't a limitation, it's the foundation of his sport's evolution. The Stoic lens flips the script. Your body isn't holding you back, it's waiting for instructions. This isn't about dismissing real physical constraints. It's about distinguishing between absolute barriers and untapped adaptability. A chef who loses their sense of taste trains their palate to detect subtle textures. A stroke survivor relearns speech by singing. Even chronic pain becomes a teacher, forcing mindfulness where haste once ruled. Modern research confirms this. Neuroplasticity means the brain rewires around injuries, and muscle memory compensates for weaknesses. The body is clay, not concrete. Musonius knew this instinctively when he declared, "Excellence is achieved not when nothing more can be added, but when nothing more can be taken away." Strip away the non-essentials and what remains is pure potential. So let's get brutally practical. That knee injury preventing squats, try swimming or resistance bands. The asthma making running unbearable, cycling's rhythmic breath might be your gateway. Even bedridden patients can isometrically tense muscles. The question isn't what can't I do, but what version of this goal fits my current container. A Paralympic sprinter doesn't mourn their lack of legs. They master prosthetics until the blades become extensions of will. Your container might be a busy schedule, aging joints, or chronic fatigue. The Stoic move: stop fighting the container and start designing within it. Musonius left us this challenge: show me a man who blames his tools, and I'll show you a man who hasn't mastered his craft. Your body, scarred, aching, imperfect, isn't a defective tool. It's the only one guaranteed to accompany you from first breath to last. The athlete who adapts their grip to arthritic hands hasn't conceded defeat. They've discovered a new way to hold on. So ask yourself tonight, not what your body prevents, but what peculiar, unexpected doors its current shape might unlock. After all, a key's value isn't in its polish, it's in its ability to turn the lock no one else could budge. Seneca stared at an hourglass and saw something most of us miss: not just sand falling, but lifetimes being misspent grain by grain. His famous assertion that life is long if you know how to use it wasn't optimism, it was a mathematical reality. Imagine two neighbors given identical 80-year lifespans. One dies feeling starved for time, convinced years slip through his fingers. The other leaves a legacy of finished manuscripts, mastered skills, and deepened relationships. The difference, not clock hours, but attention. Fast forward to today, where the average person spends 4 years of their life watching television and another 7 scrolling mindlessly. That's not just distraction, it's a hemorrhage of potential, one autoplayed episode at a time. Let's make this painfully concrete. Open your screen time report. Add up your weekly YouTube binges, social media refreshes, and just one more episode evenings. Now multiply by 52. The result isn't just a number, it's the blueprint of an alternate life. Those 8 weekly hours on TikTok, that's 416 hours annually, enough to learn conversational Spanish, draft a novel, or train for a marathon. Seneca called this poverty of the soul, not lacking resources, but squandering them on hollow entertainment while complaining there's never time for what matters. The ancient Stoics didn't have algorithms hijacking their focus, but they understood the deeper thief, the illusion that leisure means passivity. For them, true relaxation wasn't zoning out, it was gardening, writing letters, or walking discussions with students. Energy restored through engagement, not numbness. Here's where modern neuroscience collides with ancient wisdom. When researchers tracked retirees who replaced TV time with active hobbies, chess, painting, volunteering, they found something remarkable. Not only did cognitive decline slow, but participants reported feeling time-rich. Days felt expansive because they were filled with what psychologists call episodic memories, distinct, engaged moments rather than the blur of passive consumption. That's Seneca's long life in practice. Your brain doesn't measure time by the clock, it measures it by novel experiences. 5 minutes waiting in line drags, but 5 minutes of your first piano lesson etches itself into memory. The equation is simple. More passive consumption equals contracted subjective time. More active creation equals expanded presence. So let's reclaim time like Stoic accountants. Don't just track screen time, audit at its emotional exchange rate. That 2-hour Netflix binge left you energized or hollow. That Instagram scroll sparked inspiration or envy. Now the challenge: carve 30 daily minutes from low-yield activities and reinvest them, not in vague self-improvement but deliberate practice. Always wanted to code? Those 30 minutes become 3 Pomodoro sprints on Free Code Camp. Dream of publishing? That's 250 words drafted before breakfast. The magic lies in specificity and immediacy. A client of mine replaced doom scrolling with sunrise sketching, not to become an artist, but to reclaim mornings as sacred creative space. 6 months later, her sketchbook became a product design portfolio that landed her a dream job. This isn't about austerity, it's about alchemy. Seneca wrote, "Men are frugal in guarding their personal property, but as soon as it comes to squandering time, they are most wasteful." That 30-minute reallocation isn't a sacrifice, it's a down payment on a life where someday becomes today. Your future self won't remember the show you streamed, but the language you learned or the garden you planted. Time is the only currency you can't earn more of, but you can stop spending it on distractions that leave you bankrupt of meaning. The sand is still falling. What will you do with the grains that remain? Epictetus didn't mince words about the company we keep. You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, not because of their influence, but because of what you tolerate. Picture 2 friends training for a marathon together. One wakes at dawn to run hills in the rain, the other texts, "Let's skip today, one workout won't matter." Both think they're exercising free will, but Stoics would spot the deeper dynamic. Every time we accommodate excuses, we're not just being polite, we're silently endorsing a standard. Ancient philosophers called this the corruption of the many, not malice, but the slow drip of lowered expectations that erode resolve. Modern research confirms this in startling detail. A Harvard study tracking 12,000 people over 32 years found obesity spreads through social networks like gossip. When a close friend gains weight, your own risk increases by 57%, not because you share diets, but because their shifting norms redefine what's acceptable. The same pattern holds for smoking, binge drinking, even voting habits. Humans are mirrors, unconsciously reflecting the behaviors around us. That's why Epictetus warned students to scrutinize friendships like a gardener inspects soil. Some environments nourish growth, others choke it. This isn't about blaming others for our choices. It's about recognizing that willpower is contagious in both directions. Consider 2 workplace scenarios. In one office, colleagues bond over complaining about management, turning every challenge into proof of unfairness. Next door, a team meets obstacles with "How do we solve this?" The difference isn't intelligence or resources, it's the collective mindset they breathe daily. Ancient Stoics cultivated sympatheia, the interconnectedness of all things, long before neuroscience discovered mirror neurons. They understood that discipline isn't just personal, it's ecological. So where does this leave us? Start by auditing your inner circle with Stoic honesty. That friend who always cancels plans last minute, do their flakiness make your own commitments feel flexible? the co-worker who rolls their eyes at your ambition? Are their jokes subtly permission slips for mediocrity? Even family members can be complicit. A client once told me her mother's "just rest" texts during marathon training felt loving until she realized they echoed her own fear of discomfort. Not every critic wears a villain's mask. Sometimes they wear concern like camouflage. The solution isn't purging everyone who struggles, it's about balance. Epictetus urged students to keep one finger on the pulse of society, but the rest wrapped around your purpose. Introduce antidotes to excuse heavy environments. If your gym buddy's motivation wanes, join a running club where mild talk replaces complaints. Can't avoid negative co-workers? Bookend shifts with podcasts featuring resilient minds. Tim Ferriss interviewing Navy SEAL or Brené Brown on vulnerability. Like planting flowers in polluted soil, you dilute toxins by adding nutrients. Here's the litmus test Epictetus would prescribe. After spending time with someone, ask, "Do I feel more or less capable than before we met?" Not temporarily cheered up, but fundamentally strengthened. That's the true measure of good company. Some relationships are anchors, others are sails. The Stoic life isn't lived in isolation, it's navigated by choosing who gets to chart the course with you. Marcus Aurelius faced rebellions and betrayals not as signs of failure, but as lessons inscribed in fire. His journals reveal a man who reframed every stumble as part of the curriculum, what he famously called "the obstacle is the way." Modern psychology now confirms this ancient insight. When researchers at Stanford studied children praised for effort versus innate talent, they discovered something revolutionary. The "you're so smart" group avoided challenges to protect their identity, while the "you worked hard" group sought tougher problems. The difference wasn't ability, it was whether they saw mistakes as indictments or data points. That's the Stoic learning mindset in action. Not "I'm bad at this," but "I'm in the training phase." Take language learning as an example. An adult embarrassed by their accent might abandon Spanish after stumbling through a restaurant order, but a Stoic approach. They'd recognize every mispronunciation as a neural pathway forming. Olympic gymnast Simone Biles embodies this perfectly. When she debuted a never-before-attempted vault move and fell, headlines called it a failure. She called it proof the skill was competition-ready, because even elite athletes know mastery lives on the far side of visible imperfection. The ancient craftsmen who built Rome's Pantheon didn't hide their early flawed bricks. They displayed them in temple walls as markers of progress. Here's where modern self-consciousness betrays us. We've been conditioned to believe competence must precede visibility, that we should practice in private until we're ready. But the Stoics practiced in the arena. Epictetus taught philosophy while limping from slavery-inflicted injuries. Seneca wrote essays admitting his own hypocrisies. Their wisdom whispers, growth happens when you stop treating your learning process like a secret. A tech founder I admire applies this by coding live on Twitch, errors and all. Watching him troubleshoot in real time does more than teach programming. It dismantles the myth of flawless creation. Your challenge is deliberately uncomfortable. Pick one skill you've avoided because you're not good enough yet, maybe sketching, public speaking, or dancing. Now perform it publicly within the next 72 hours. Not a polished version, but the raw, unedited act. Film a 30-second cooking tutorial showing the messy countertops. Play guitar at an open mic and miss a chord. The goal isn't virality, it's vaccinating yourself against the fear of being seen mid-process. Like a blacksmith tempering steel, each public stumble forges resilience. The Japanese practice of wabi-sabi, finding beauty in imperfection, echoes this Stoic truth. A master potter intentionally leaves thumbprints in glaze to honor the human hand behind the work. Your mistakes aren't flaws to erase, they're fingerprints proving authentic effort. When Marcus wrote, "The impediment advances the work," he wasn't spinning platitudes. He was acknowledging that every fumbled speech, botched project, or awkward first attempt contains the blueprint for your next breakthrough. The world doesn't need more flawless performances, it needs people brave enough to be apprentices in public. There's a peculiar power in staring unflinchingly at your own expiration date. The ancient Stoics didn't just casually acknowledge mortality, they wielded it as a tool, a daily practice called memento mori. Picture this, a Roman general celebrating a triumphant march through the city, but behind him a slave whispers in his ear, "Remember, you must die." This wasn't morbid theater, it was psychological armor against complacency. Fast forward to today, and we've replaced that whisper with the endless scroll of distractions, the seductive lie that there's always tomorrow. But Seneca sliced through that illusion with surgical precision. Putting things off is the biggest waste of life. It snatches away each day as it comes, denying us the present by promising the future. Consider the weight of that statement. Every time you say, "I'll start next month," you're not just delaying action, you're surrendering a piece of your finite existence to an imaginary version of yourself who'll supposedly have more courage, time, or motivation. Researchers call this the procrastination paradox, the gap between who we are and who we assume we'll magically become. A study tracking lifelong regrets found that 90% of people lamented not what they did, but what they didn't do, the risks untaken, the conversations avoided, the passions unpursued. The haunting question isn't whether you'll face regret. It's whether that regret will be for things outside your control or for choices you consciously postpone. This is where memento mori transforms from a philosophical concept into a lever for action. Take the story of a nurse who spent years jotting down the dying confessions of her patients. The most common refrain, "I wish I hadn't waited," not for wealth or fame, but for the courage to live authentically, to leave the toxic job, reconcile with the estranged sibling, or finally take that solo trip. The Stoics would nod knowingly. Epictetus, born into slavery, framed it starkly. You act like mortals in all you fear and immortals in all you desire. We fear embarrassment today but assume we'll have decades to chase dreams. The math never adds up, so let's make this visceral. Close your eyes and fast forward to your final moments. Not as an abstraction, but as a sensory experience, the weight of the sheets, the rasp of your breath, the faces around you. Now ask, what untapped potential aches loudest? Is it the book unwritten because you feared criticism, the business idea shelved until things settled down, the estrangement left unhealed because pride felt easier than vulnerability? That's your compass. The French author Montaigne kept a skull on his desk not to dwell on death but to clarify life. When every decision is filtered through the lens of, will this matter on my last day? Trivialities fall away, leaving only what's sacred. Practical exercise. Grab a timer and set it for 90 seconds. In that window, scribble 3 actions you'd take immediately if you learned you had 1 year left. No overthinking, just raw, unfiltered priorities. Now circle 1, not the grandest but the most neglected, the thing you've consistently deprioritized. That's your leaky bucket. Stoicism doesn't demand you quit your job or sell possessions. It insists you stop lying to yourself about someday. A client of mine did this drill and realized travel more masked a deeper truth. He feared his kids would remember him as always working. His solution transforms Sunday mornings into adventure breakfasts, mapping exotic recipes and cultures with his daughters. No waiting for retirement. No perfect savings account, just immediacy infused with meaning. The energy of urgency isn't about fear, it's about focus. When a ship's captain spots a storm brewing, she doesn't waste time debating whether to adjust course, she acts. Your mortality is that storm, not to paralyze but to propel. Marcus Aurelius scribbled in the darkness of his military tent, "You could leave life right now." Let that determine what you do and say, not as a threat but as a gift, the deadline that sharpens your priorities, the whisper that turns later into today. The sand is falling. What will you build with what remains? Seneca once watched a wealthy Roman nobleman pace his villa, fretting over staff shortages and shipment delays for his imported marble floors. Meanwhile, a cobbler outside cheerfully repaired shoes with scraps of leather, humming as he worked. This sparked Seneca's counterintuitive epiphany. Poverty is freedom, not because deprivation is virtuous, but because constraints force ingenuity most luxuries never touch. Today's most disruptive startups echo this ancient truth. While competitors wait for venture capital to fund perfect products, bootstrappers like Basecamp and MailChimp built empires by treating limitations as creative fuel. Their secret: scarcity isn't the enemy of innovation, it's the forge. Consider how this plays out in everyday breakthroughs. A chef restricted to 5 ingredients invents a signature dish. A filmmaker shooting on an old smartphone discovers angles a Hollywood crew would miss. Even nature obeys this rule. Cacti, I don't mourn their desert conditions, they evolved needles to conserve water. The Stoics recognized this pattern long before Silicon Valley. Abundance often breeds complacency, while constraints demand reinvention. When Seneca advised Lucilius to set sail in a leaky boat if necessary, he wasn't glorifying struggle, he was highlighting how necessity sharpens skills no calm sea ever could. Modern psychology confirms this. Researchers at the University of Amsterdam found that teams given tight budgets produced more inventive solutions than those with unlimited resources. One group was tasked with designing a playground using only recycled materials. Their result, a modular playscape that won design awards. The no-budget limitation didn't stifle creativity, it redirected it from monetary solutions to systemic ones. This mirrors how Twitter's 280-character limit birthed a new language of concision, or how indie game developers turned pixelated graphics into aesthetic signatures. The constraint isn't a cage, it's the trellis guiding growth in unexpected directions. So how do we apply this? Start by identifying one area where you've been waiting for enough money, time, or permission. Now impose an artificial constraint. If you've delayed writing until you could afford a writing retreat, draft your next chapter using only your phone's notes app during commute fragments. Dreaming of launching a podcast but stuck on equipment? Record your first episode using a towel closet, studio, and basic editing software. The goal isn't to create polished work. It's to bypass perfectionism by making scarcity your collaborator. History's greatest innovators thrived this way. The Rolling Stones recorded Street Fighting Man on a cassette deck because studio time was too expensive. J.K. Rowling scribbled early Harry Potter drafts on napkins while living on welfare. Their constraints didn't diminish their visions, they distilled them. Your challenge this week: choose one project and strip it down to its skeleton. No budget for a gym membership. Test bodyweight workouts using furniture as equipment. No time for language learning. Replace your morning scroll with 5 minutes of Duolingo. The magic lies in discovering what flourishes when excess is peeled away. Seneca's leather-working cobbler knew something the marble-obsessed nobleman didn't. Mastery isn't about accumulating resources, it's about maximizing meaning per unit of limitation. Your current constraints might be the exact pressure needed to crystallize genius you'd never unlock in comfort. The boat leaks, start bailing, and notice how the rhythm of your hands becomes its own kind of dance. There's an unspoken epidemic in modern self-improvement: the shame of not knowing. Watch any online discussion thread long enough and you'll spot it. Someone hesitates to ask a basic question, terrified of appearing ignorant. The ancient Stoics would have found this baffling. Epictetus, who literally opened his school to anyone willing to learn, had no patience for this pride. His students included wealthy merchants alongside former slaves, not because he was charitable, but because he knew wisdom grows fastest when ego gets out of the way. That bench where students sat, it wasn't a throne of expertise, it was an altar of humility. Consider how this plays out today. A junior developer spends nights secretly Googling terms colleagues toss around casually. A gym newcomer mimics advanced lifts incorrectly rather than risk admitting confusion. Even parenting forums brim with silent struggles, mothers nodding along to sleep training advice they don't understand but won't question. Beneath these scenes lurks a toxic assumption. Competence means never needing guidance. The Stoics demolished this fiction. Marcus Aurelius, despite being emperor, kept philosophers like Junius Rusticus on his advisory council not for show, but to publicly demonstrate that even rulers require teachers. His journals reveal a man constantly seeking correction, writing, "To accept criticism without resentment is a skill sharper than any sword." Modern research reveals why this is so hard. Stanford psychologists found that people overestimate how harshly others will judge requests for help by 40%. That coworker you're afraid to ask for clarification. They're likely flattered you value their insight. That mentor you've idolized from afar, they probably remember their own early stumbles vividly. The gap isn't in their willingness to teach, it's in our courage to ask. When Alexander the Great studied under Aristotle, the philosopher didn't praise his pupil for already knowing rhetoric. He challenged him to ask why until it became uncomfortable. Growth lives in that discomfort. Here's the practice Stoic students called Procrastination, the art of purposeful seeking. Identify one skill you've pretended to understand but haven't mastered. Maybe it's Excel formulas you faked your way through, meditation techniques you've half learned from apps, or even emotional regulation during conflicts. Now find someone 3 steps ahead of you, not a world expert, just slightly farther along. The barista who makes latte art you can't replicate, the neighbor whose garden thrives while yours wilts. Then ask this exact question: what's one thing you wish someone had shown you when you were where I am? This phrasing does magic. It honors their journey while legitimizing yours. The resistance you'll feel before asking isn't a warning sign. It's the signal you're on the right track. Like a muscle burning during proper form, that internal cringe means you're strengthening something essential. The entrepreneur who admits their financial illiteracy to their accountant grows richer in knowledge. The writer who shares unfinished drafts with a critique group sharpens prose faster than any solo polishing. Even Seneca, who tutored Nero, regularly sought feedback from his own students, believing, "A teacher who cannot be taught has already begun dying." Tonight, leave one deliberate gap in your expertise unconcealed. Text a friend about that guitar chord you still can't play cleanly. Raise your hand in that meeting and say, "Can we back up? I'm not following." The Stoics called this euthymia, the tranquility of being exactly as skilled as you are today. No performance is necessary. Because the path from ignorance to mastery isn't paved with perfect pretenses, it's built brick by brick with humble questions, each one a small victory over pride. The ancient Stoics practiced something radical by today's standards: deliberate solitude. Not isolation, but the intentional carving out of space to converse with their own thoughts. Marcus Aurelius wrote his deepest reflections not in a palace hall surrounded by advisors, but in the quiet of his military tent. Seneca retreated to his modest country villa, declaring, "You must withdraw into yourself as much as possible." Fast forward to our hyper-connected era, where the average person touches their phone 2,600 times a day, and that Stoic silence feels like a relic. But here's the twist: what they called solitude, we might now call digital detox, the conscious reclaiming of attention from the endless scroll. Think about the last time you sat alone with your thoughts, no podcast in your ears, no thumb sliding across a screen. For many, it triggers something close to panic. Neuroscientists call this stimulus hunger, a craving for constant input that mirrors addiction pathways. Cal Newport's concept of digital minimalism, removing non-essential technologies to make room for meaningful engagement, isn't just productivity advice. It's Stoic philosophy adapted for the iPhone age. When Newport suggests a 30-day tech cleanse, he's channeling Epictetus' insistence that we first unlearn what we've been taught to value falsely. The apps we mindlessly open aren't neutral tools. They're designed to exploit our psychological vulnerabilities, turning focus into a commodity. Consider how this plays out in real life. A study at the University of Virginia had participants sit alone in a room for 15 minutes with nothing but their thoughts, and 67% of men opted to give themselves mild electric shocks rather than endure the silence. That's not just boredom, it's a sign of how deeply we've lost the ability to be present with ourselves. The Stoics would have recognized this as a crisis of attention. Seneca warned about being everywhere but nowhere, scattered across distractions while our inner lives atrophy. His solution, scheduled stillness, not meditation in the modern sense, but what he called interrogating the day, examining where your energy flowed and whether it aligned with your values. So where do you start? Try this experiment. Delete your most draining app for 72 hours. Not the one you think you should quit, but the one that leaves you feeling hollow after use. For many, it's not social media itself, it's the endless comparison trap of Instagram, the outrage vortex of Twitter, or the dopamine slots of TikTok. Track what surfaces in its absence: restlessness, anxiety, creativity. That's your brain relearning how to generate its own stimulation, like a muscle rebuilding after atrophy. A musician I know replaced his morning scroll with scribbling chord progressions on scrap paper. Within weeks, he'd written an album's worth of material that had been stuck for years. The apps hadn't caused his block, they just provided an escape from the discomfort of creation. The deeper truth here is that digital clutter isn't just about time wasted, it's about identity misplaced. Every minute spent absorbing fragments of others' curated lives is a minute not spent crafting your own. Marcus Aurelius cautioned, "You become what you give your attention to." When we outsource our solitude to algorithms, we surrender the very space where Stoic wisdom takes root, the quiet in which we distinguish our true desires from manufactured ones. Your challenge isn't to renounce technology, but to relearn what the ancients knew: that stillness isn't empty. It's the forge where clarity is hammered out, one uninterrupted thought at a time. The alarm screams at 5 a.m., and your hand hovers over the snooze button like a politician avoiding a tough question. Here's where Stoics like Seneca would intervene with a brutal truth: that moment of hesitation isn't just about sleep. It's the first domino in a day of negotiated surrenders. They practiced premeditatio, a mental dress rehearsal for resistance. Picture a Roman general the night before battle, visualizing not victory but chaos, arrows missing their marks, allies faltering, his own fear rising. By confronting these scenarios in advance, he wasn't inviting disaster, he was vaccinating himself against panic when it mattered. Your morning ritual is no different. When you preemptively see yourself throwing blankets over the alarm, you're not predicting failure, you're drafting a battle plan for your weaker self. Modern psychology confirms this. Athletes who mentally rehearse stumbling mid-race recover faster when it actually happens. Surgeons visualize complications before making the first incision. The magic lies in specificity. Don't just vaguely promise, "I'll wake up early." Instead, the night before, close your eyes and script the scene. The grogginess pressing like weights, the warmth of the bed, the voice whispering just 9 more minutes. Now insert your Stoic countermove, swinging legs to the floor before the debate even starts. Marcus Aurelius called this digging the trench before the siege. You're not fighting the temptation in real time, you've already outflanked it. consider the difference between two co-workers facing an impending deadline. One spends the evening dreading tomorrow's workload, waking exhausted before her alarm. The other conducts a premeditatio, visualizing printer jams, last-minute revisions, even her own frustration. At dawn, when chaos inevitably strikes, she's not derailed, she's following a mental protocol. This isn't pessimism, it's strategic immunity to excuses. The Stoic quote, "The willing are led by fate, the unwilling dragged," captures this perfectly. You either design your response to obstacles in advance, or you let those obstacles design your day for you. So how do you operationalize this? Start with the night before ritual. Beside your bed, place a glass of water and a notepad. The water is for the immediate physical jolt. Drinking it upon waking shifts your body state. The notepad, it's for the if-then scenarios you'll scribble down. If I feel too tired to run, then I'll just walk for 5 minutes. If my inbox overwhelms me, then I'll tackle the 3 oldest messages first. These aren't contingency plans, they're neural fire escapes your brain can grab when willpower burns out. The true test comes when life interrupts. Your child wakes sick at 4 a.m. Traffic adds 20 unexpected minutes. Notice how premeditatio differs from regular planning. It's not about controlling external events, it's about rehearsing your sovereignty over internal ones. A chef doesn't just prep ingredients, she anticipates the burners misfiring, the sauce breaking. When they do, her hands move before her panic does. That's the Stoic edge. Your excuses don't stand a chance against a mind that's already lived through them and chosen its response. The alarm rings, your feet hit the floor. The day hasn't changed, but your readiness for it has. Epictetus didn't climb philosophical heights in a single leap. He took steps, often literally. The Stoic teacher who walked miles barefoot in winter to harden his body understood something modern goal setters often forget. Mastery isn't about grand declarations, it's about daily deposits. Picture 2 aspiring novelists. One stares at a blank document, paralyzed by the dream of writing a 300-page masterpiece. The other commits to 300 words before breakfast, less than half an email's length. At year's end, one has a collection of excuses, the other has a draft. That's the Stoic small wins philosophy. Progress isn't the reward you earn after the grind, it's the grind itself, reshaped into bearable, even enjoyable increments. The magic lies in how our brains process achievement. Neuroscientists at MIT found that small, frequent wins release dopamine, not just the pleasure chemical, but the motivation molecule. It's why video games hook us with micro-rewards. Leveling up a character by 2% feels more actionable than staring at a max-level leaderboard. The Stoics weaponized this instinctively. When Seneca advised breaking life into tiny pieces to manage anxiety, he wasn't offering comfort, he was prescribing a cognitive tool. A marathon runner doesn't fixate on mile 26 during the first stride. They focus on the next 100 meters. Your goals are no different, that looming career change. Start with 15 minutes of resume, tweaking while your coffee cools. The mountain of debt, today's win, is tracking one expense category. Here's where most productivity systems fail. They mistake planning for progress. Filling a vision board with dream homes and job titles feels productive, but it's just decorating the gap between where you are and where you want to be. The Stoic approach: treat goals like pottery. You can't sculpt the entire vase at once, but you can center the clay today, shape the base tomorrow. James Clear's Atomic Habits concept mirrors this. 1% better daily compounds into 37 times improvement over a year. Epictetus put it bluntly, no great thing is created suddenly. Not can't be is not. The universe doesn't work in leaps, it unfolds in cycles. Let's translate this into a challenge. Identify one ambition that's felt overwhelming, perhaps learning coding, decluttering your home, or repairing a relationship. Now shrink it until it feels laughably easy. Want to study Python? Commit to typing "Hello World" into an IDE before brushing your teeth. Need to reconnect with your sister? Send a meme about an inside joke. No heavy emotional lifting. The smaller the action, the more subversive its power. A client of mine conquered public speaking anxiety by recording 30-second voice memos to himself in an empty conference room. 3 months later, he was presenting to boardrooms. The stage didn't shrink, his capacity expanded through micro-exposures. This isn't about lowering standards. It's about restructuring growth. Michelangelo didn't attack the Sistine Chapel ceiling with broad strokes. He painted individual figures one at a time, often lying awkwardly on scaffolding. Your version might look like practicing Spanish for the duration of a coffee brew or doing wall push-ups during TV commercials. The key is consistency over intensity. Miss a day, the Stoics would shrug. What matters is the next decision. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, you don't have to turn this into something. It doesn't have to upset you. The path isn't linear, it's a series of recommitments. Your turn, grab a coin and place it beside your keyboard or pillow. That's your micro-action token. When you spot it, perform one tiny act toward your Everest, research one scholarship, email one potential mentor, stretch for 60 seconds. The coin isn't just a reminder, it's a psychological contract. Epictetus taught that we suffer not from events, but from our judgments about them. By making the judgment, this is too small to matter, irrelevant, you're not just making progress, you're rewriting your relationship with achievement itself. The masterpiece will emerge brushstroke by brushstroke. Marcus Aurelius didn't reign alone. He surrounded himself with trusted philosophers like Junius Rusticus, men sworn not to flatter but to challenge. When the emperor's judgments wavered or his discipline faltered, they weren't sycophants whispering reassurance. They were mirrors reflecting back his own principles with unflinching clarity. Fast forward to today, where the average person spends 11 hours daily consuming content but minutes in meaningful accountability, and the Stoic model of fellowship feels less like ancient history and more like a survival tactic. The right accountability partner isn't just a cheerleader or a taskmaster. They're the person who spots the story you're telling yourself before you even finish the sentence. Think of it like this: 2 friends train for a marathon together. One starts skipping long runs, claiming work stress. A typical buddy might say, "That's okay, rest up." A Stoic ally would ask, is work really the barrier, or is it the story you're crafting to avoid discomfort? The difference isn't cruelty, it's candor wrapped in care. Modern research from the American Society of Training and Development underscores this. People with a specific accountability partner increase their odds of success by 95%. Not because they're monitored, but because the act of articulating goals to someone who knows your patterns forces honesty. A gym buddy knows when "my knee hurts" is legitimate versus when it's code for "I'm avoiding squats." The magic lies in structure. Stoic fellowship wasn't casual coffee chats, it was ritualized. Epictetus held morning lectures where students debated real-life challenges, then paired off to report back on applied lessons. Adapt this today with a weekly 10-minute excise excuses call. The rules: each person shares one goal, one obstacle, and one self-deception they've spotted in their own reasoning. The listener's job isn't to fix or comfort, but to reflect back inconsistencies using Stoic questions. If your best self saw this obstacle, what would they perceive that you're missing? How does this excuse serve you in the short term but rob you long term? Like a philosopher's scalpel, these questions dissect justification without drawing blood. But choose wisely. Not everyone qualifies for this role. The ideal accountability partner operates like Marcus's Rusticus, knowledgeable enough to spot logical gaps, invested enough to care, but detached enough to resist colluding in your dram. They're the person who, when you say, "I'll start saving next month," counters with Seneca's reminder that hesitation is the thief of time. When you complain about a toxic boss, they help reframe it as Epictetus would. What's within your control to shift your reactions, your boundaries, your exit strategy? This isn't about finding a Stoic scholar. It's about aligning with someone who embodies the spirit of Parrhesia fearless speech. Practical exercise: audit your inner circle through a Stoic lens. Who responds to your challenges with solutions versus sympathy? Who asks what's next when others say that's unfair? That's your starting pool. Then propose a trial framework for 21 days. Exchange nightly voice memos answering 3 questions. Where did I act with integrity today? Where did I rationalize? What's one step I'll take tomorrow to bridge that gap? The format matters. Texting invites half-truths. Hearing someone's voice cracks the veneer of self-deception. The highest function of such partnerships isn't accountability at all, it's alchemy. When sculptor Augusta Savage mentored young Jacob Lawrence during the Harlem Renaissance, she didn't just critique his brushwork, she redefined what he believed possible for himself. That's the echo of Stoic fellowship, relationships that don't just track progress but expand vision. Your excuses might whisper convincingly in isolation, but in the presence of someone who knows your potential better than you do, they crumble like old plaster. Find the person who refuses to let your reasons become your chains. Seneca once wrote that fire tests gold while adversity tests the strong, a truth that reshapes how we view every setback. Imagine 2 potters working the same clay. One curses when their vase cracks in the kiln, convinced the flaw ruins everything. The other studies the fracture lines, mixes new clay with the shards, and creates a piece stronger for having broken. Both faced the same event, but only one understood what the Stoics knew. Fragility isn't defined by what breaks you, but by what you rebuild from the pieces. This is the anti-fragile identity, not just bouncing back from failure, but reinventing because of it. Take the story of a tech founder whose first startup collapsed after burning through funding. A fragile ego would have scripted this as "I'm not cut out for entrepreneurship." Instead, he conducted what Seneca called a post-mortem without blame, listing every misstep without self-flagellation. Over-caffeinated pitches that confused investors. Lesson: simplify the message. Hiring friends rather than experts. Lesson: competence over comfort. Within a year, his new venture leveraged those very failures into safeguards, clearer communication protocols, rigorous hiring matrices. The second company didn't just survive, it thrived because its foundation was forged in the fires of the first collapse. This mindset shift lies in the syntax we use. "I failed" frames a moment as final, while "I'm learning" treats it as data. Modern psychology backs this. Studies on error positivity show our brains literally emit different electrical signals when we view mistakes as feedback rather than threats. A musician who flubs a performance can either internalize it as "I'm a bad pianist" or dissect it with Stoic detachment. The third measure needs slower practice. "My posture tightened under stress." One interpretation paralyzes, the other prepares. Here's where most self-help advice falls short. Resilience isn't about positive affirmations or gaslighting yourself into ignoring pain. It's about the forensic examination Seneca practiced after his exile, identifying not just what went wrong, but what structural weaknesses the failure revealed. A chef whose souffle collapses doesn't gain resilience by repeating, "I'm a great cook." They grow by analyzing oven temperature, egg whipping time, even the humidity that day. Every breakdown contains its own repair manual. If you're willing to read the instructions, your turn. Pick one past failure, not the inconsequential "I burnt the toast" kind, but the one that still tightens your throat when remembered. Now steal a page from the Stoic playbook. On a sheet of paper, draw 3 columns. Label the first "Event," adjust facts, no emotions. The client rejected our pitch on March 12th. The second column, judgment, holds your initial story. I'm terrible at presentations. The third, extracted wisdom. This is where you mine for upgrades. Maybe the real lesson was, I need to practice with non-team audiences, or our deck lacked a clear cost-benefit slide. The goal isn't to erase the sting, but to convert it into fuel. The anti-fragile identity isn't born from avoiding falls. It's forged in the deliberate act of rising differently each time. Like blacksmiths tempering steel, we strengthen not by resisting heat, but by learning how to wield it. Seneca's fire doesn't just test gold, it reveals which elements were mere alloy and which are pure enough to endure. Your failures aren't proof of your limits, they're the refining process for what remains unbreakable. Epictetus once saw a student meticulously polishing his boots before a philosophy lecture and delivered a cutting remark. If you spent half that effort correcting your character, you wouldn't need to shine your shoes to impress. That moment captures the Stoic tension between seeming and being, the trap of performative virtue versus embodied change. Today's world thrives on explanations, LinkedIn posts about leadership philosophies, podcasts dissecting productivity hacks, endless debates about the right way to live. But the Stoics measured wisdom in silent action. Imagine two chefs burning a dish. One delivers a monologue about oven inconsistencies and supplier issues. The other simply remakes the meal, no commentary attached. Both reach the same outcome, but one leaves dignity intact and trust strengthened. Consider how ego disguises itself in modern excuses. That delayed project email blaming unforeseen complexities, the defensive tone when a partner points out forgetfulness. Even positive achievements get diluted when preceded by excessive justification. The coworker who prefaces every contribution with, "This might be stupid, but..." What if we treated actions like gravity, undeniable forces needing no explanation? A study at Cornell tracked workplace communications and found that employees who admitted mistakes without qualifiers, "My oversight, here's the fix," were promoted 30% faster than those who paired apologies with excuses. The data confirms what Epictetus intuited: competence speaks loudest when unaccompanied by ego's soundtrack. The test comes in those microscopic moments before reflex takes over. Your hand hovers over a keyboard to type, "The printer was jammed," instead of "I delayed sending." Your tongue prepares to say, "Nobody trained me," rather than "I'll learn tonight." These aren't just word choices, they're forks in the psychological road. One path preserves the fragile self-image at the cost of growth. The other trades temporary discomfort for enduring self-respect. The ancient Stoics had a drilling exercise for this. Students would wear plain tunics in Rome's bustling markets, enduring stares while reciting philosophy aloud. The lesson wasn't about thick skin, it was about divorcing self-worth from external validation. When you stop needing to narrate your virtues, you're finally free to live them. Practical exercise for 1 week: institute a no postmortem rule at work or home. When something goes wrong, missed deadline, thoughtless remark, burnt dinner, allow yourself only 2 sentences: what happened and the remedy. No backstory, no blame-shifting preamble. You'll discover something startling. Most explanations we think are for others are actually crutches for ourselves. That email you drafted explaining your hectic week before hitting send, delete everything before, here's the updated file. The magic lies in what blooms in that silence: trust, momentum, and the quiet confidence of someone more invested in progress than posturing. This isn't about suppressing healthy self-advocacy. It's about distinguishing between necessary context and ego's camouflage. Epictetus didn't forbid all speech, he demanded alignment between words and deeds. When a ship's captain announces a storm delay, passengers don't need his sailing resume. They need to see his hands adjusting the sails. Your life is that ship. The fewer words spent defending your course, the more energy remains for steering it. The next time you feel the urge to explain, ask, is this serving the solution or salvaging my self-image? Then emulate the blacksmith who stops talking when the metal hits the anvil, not because he's out of words, but because the work speaks for itself. Marcus Aurelius guarded his attention like a sentry at the gates of Rome, not because focus was convenient, but because he knew distraction was the first breach in life's defenses. His journals brim with reminders to restrict yourself to the present, a radical notion in our era of fractured attention. Today, we call this deep work, but the Stoics practiced it centuries before Wi-Fi turned our minds into battlegrounds. Picture a Roman senator drafting legislation by candlelight, his workspace devoid of notifications or multitasking. That singular focus wasn't just productive, it was an act of reverence for the task at hand. Fast forward to your last productive hour. How many tabs were open? How many times did your thumb twitch toward your phone? The difference isn't technology, it's the deliberate cultivation of what Stoics termed vigilant attention. Modern research quantifies what the ancients intuited. A University of California study found that office workers average just 3 minutes on a task before switching. Each interruption requires 23 minutes to regain deep focus, a cognitive tax the Stoics would have deemed catastrophic. Cal Newport's digital minimalism parallels Seneca's advice to do less but do it better. Not just efficiency hacks, but philosophical stances against the erosion of meaningful engagement. Consider two writers. One crafts paragraphs while toggling between email and social media, her sentences littered with reactive energy. The other writes with her phone in another room, channeling undiluted creativity into each phrase. At day's end, one has produced volume, the other value. Here's where theory meets practice. The challenge isn't to abandon technology, but to install Stoic attention guards. Start with a single daily hour, not just screen-free, but intention-full. Treat it like a sacred appointment with your highest self. A software developer I know uses a physical hourglass, flipping it to demarcate his coding sessions. The flowing sand isn't just a timer, it's a visceral reminder of life's finite grains. Another client transformed her mornings by placing her phone in a drawer until she'd completed her most demanding task, channeling Epictetus' teaching that no thing great is created suddenly. The magic lies in the ritual, not the duration. The real test comes when discomfort arises. That itch to check updates isn't boredom, it's your brain's addiction to novelty, what neuroscientists call dopamine loops. The Stoics anticipated this too. When Marcus wrote, "You own only your mind, not external events," he was prescribing focus as an antidote to anxiety. Every email left unanswered for 60 minutes is proof you're not just managing time, but sovereignty. A CEO client discovered this unexpectedly after committing to undisturbed strategy sessions. She found clarity spilled into other hours. Like a muscle trained under resistance, focused attention strengthens all cognitive activity around it. Your turn. Choose one high-leverage task, drafting a proposal, learning a skill, even a heartfelt conversation. Now engineer Stoic conditions, silence notifications, clear physical clutter. State your intention aloud. For this hour, I am a writer. When distraction mutters, respond as Marcus would, not with guilt but gentle redirection. This is what I'm doing now. The goal isn't perfection but presence. Those 60 minutes will feel interminable at first, like holding a plank, but soon you'll discover what the Stoics knew. Tranquility isn't found in doing less arbitrarily, but in doing what matters fully, fiercely, without apology. Seneca watched a seasoned sea captain adjust his sails against sudden winds, not in defeat, but with the quiet precision of someone who knew a rival mattered more than the route. This moment crystallized his philosophy on persistence. Change course often, but never the destination. That's the pivot modern hustle culture misses, the difference between quitting and recalibrating. Take the programmer who spends years mastering a coding language only to discover AI has shifted the industry. The fragile ego calls this wasted time. The Stoic sees it as transferable skill. Syntax becomes secondary when problem-solving logic remains. History's greatest pivots follow this pattern. Milton Hershey filed for bankruptcy 3 times before realizing candy, not caramel, was his destiny. Vera Wang transitioned from figure skating to fashion at age 40. Even Starbucks began selling espresso machines before discovering their real product was the third place between work and home. These aren't failures rerouted, their purposes refined through resistance. Seneca observed that rivers meeting boulders don't stop flowing. They find new channels without forgetting their journey to the sea. So where does this leave your stalled goals? Start by distinguishing between dead ends and detours. That abandoned novel might signal not a lack of discipline, but misaligned medium. Perhaps your insights thrive better as a podcast or screenplay. The fitness routine you keep skipping. Maybe it's not motivation that's lacking, but the wrong movement. A client of mine hated running but discovered rowing lit up her competitive spirit. The aim wasn't abandoned, the vehicle was upgraded. Here's the litmus test Seneca would prescribe. Grab a sheet of paper and divide it into 2 columns. Label the first purpose. The core need this goal fulfills creative expression, financial freedom, physical vitality. The second column is form, the current method you're using to achieve it. Now scan for mismatches. Is your purpose helping others, wedged uncomfortably into a corporate sales role when teaching lights you up? Does your financial security goal rely solely on promotions in a dying industry? The Stoic pivot isn't surrender, it's aligning your strategy with your uncompromised why. Observe how nature handles this. Bamboo bends in storms that snap oak trees because its strength includes flexibility. Your career, relationships, even personal growth all contain these pivot points, moments when clinging to the how sabotages the why. When legendary investor Ray Dalio's analysis proved wrong, he didn't abandon his principles. He refined his models, calling this the pain that leads to learning. That's the pivot in action, treating every obstacle as feedback, not failure. Tonight, choose one goal that's felt stagnant. Ask Seneca's razor-sharp question, am I being called to quit or to adapt? The dream of opening a bakery might not mean abandoning your accounting skills, but merging them into a dessert consultancy. The marathon ambition could shift to trail running if pavement pounds your joints. Persistence isn't linear, it's iterative. Like a sculptor adjusting to the grain of the marble, you're not walking away from the masterpiece, you're learning how to reveal it. Marcus Aurelius left behind no grand monuments boasting of his conquests, just a worn journal filled with raw self-interrogation, his most cutting insight. What's not to be done is not to be done well, not a call for perfection, but a blade slicing through the fog of half-hearted intentions. Imagine 2 carpenters. One spends years designing intricate blueprints for chairs he never builds, explaining away delays with tool shortages and market research. The other crafts rough but functional stools each week, refining through practice rather than theory. At life's end, one leaves behind a portfolio of excuses, the other, a home filled with furniture bearing the marks of his hands. That's the legacy of action versus intention. The difference between what we plan to contribute and what actually remains when we're gone. Legacy isn't built in the grand declarations we whisper to ourselves at night, but in the small, stubborn acts we choose when no one's watching. Consider Florence Nightingale revolutionizing hospital sanitation, not through lofty ideals alone, but by relentlessly scrubbing floors herself during the Crimean War. Or James Dyson enduring 5,000 failed vacuum prototypes, each misstep documented, not dismissed. The Stoics measured a life not by its aspirations but by its artifacts. Your excuses, whether wrapped in "when I have more time" or "once things settle down," won't echo in the memories of those you leave behind. They'll recall what you did with the time you had. Here's where we confront the uncomfortable math of legacy. Take out a coin, the kind that jingles in pockets or gets lost under couch cushions. Now assign each side a value. Heads represents actions aligned with your deepest values. Tails stands for time spent rationalizing inaction. Flip it 10 times in your mind. That ratio, that's the draft of your current epitaph. Marcus didn't journal about the battles he almost won or the treaties he nearly brokered. He recorded his daily struggles to show up fully, not as an emperor, but as a man relentlessly chiseling his character. Your task isn't to craft a flawless legacy statement, but to excise the excuses poisoning it. Start with 2 columns. Label the first "What will be said." Here, write the truths you want whispered at your retirement party or carved into your headstone. She built bridges between feuding teams. He made strangers feel seen. Now the harder column, what's blocking it? Not vague villains like time or circumstance, but specific surrender points. That networking event skipped because you felt unworthy. The difficult conversation postponed to avoid discomfort. These aren't footnotes, they're the anti-legacy in progress. The final step transforms philosophy into physics. Select one item from the blocking column and perform its opposite within 24 hours, not perfectly, but materially. If fear of rejection stifles your creative output, publish that draft Medium post with the disclaimer, "Learning in public." If waiting for ideal conditions delays your health turnaround, take a walk tonight in less than perfect weather. Legacy accretes in these microscopic victories over inertia. Like Roman concrete, that ancient marvel still standing millennia later, your enduring impact won't come from single heroic acts, but from the daily mixing of grit and intention. Stand now where Marcus stood on his final night, feverish and weary, still scribbling reminders to himself about integrity. Not as an emperor surveying conquered lands, but as a mortal asking, "What's left in the wake of my choices?" The sand in your hourglass isn't waiting for your excuses to expire. It's waiting for your hands to start building. Excuses melt like wax when held to the flame of Stoic wisdom, not through sheer willpower, but by rewiring how we perceive obstacles themselves. This ancient philosophy doesn't just help us endure life's friction. It teaches us to harness it as the very energy that propels us forward. Think of a blacksmith's forge. The same fire that softens metal also tempers it into something unbreakable. Amor fati, loving one's fate, isn't passive resignation. It's the alchemy that transforms setbacks into setups. When a musician's concert tour gets cancelled, she doesn't rage against the empty venues. She streams solo performances from her living room, discovering a new intimacy with her audience. The obstacle didn't block her path, it revealed a detour she'd never have taken otherwise. Premeditatio, the Stoic practice of mentally rehearsing challenges, acts like a vaccine for excuses. Picture an astronaut running simulations of equipment failures before launch. By visualizing worst-case scenarios, a torn parachute, a jammed airlock, they're not inviting disaster. They're inoculating themselves against panic when it matters most. Modern psychology validates this. Nurses who mentally prep for chaotic shifts make fewer errors under pressure. A teacher friend of mine uses this before parent-teacher conferences, scripting responses to tough questions the night before. "It's not about predicting the future," she says. "It's about reminding myself I have tools to handle whatever comes." When we confront our fears in advance, excuses lose their grip. Yet philosophy without action is just decoration. That's where micro-actions dismantle procrastination's stronghold. The writer staring at a blank page doesn't will himself to draft a novel, he commits to 3 sentences. The marathon hopeful doesn't obsess over 26 miles. She laces up her shoes for a single block. These aren't compromises, they're Trojan horses smuggling momentum past resistance. Neuroscience confirms this. Small wins trigger dopamine, the brain's motivation fuel. One client paralyzed by debt started tracking just one daily expense. Within weeks, those micro-audits revealed spending patterns invisible at macro scale. The mountain became climbable because she stopped staring at the summit and focused on the next foothold. Epictetus, the former slave who became Stoicism's most influential teacher, left us with a sword to sever excuses at their root. First say what you'd be, then do what you have to do. This inversion is revolutionary. Most people wait to feel like a runner before running or a writer before writing. The Stoic becomes these things through the act itself. A nurse doesn't gain compassion before tending wounds, she cultivates it by showing up at bedsides. Your identity isn't a prerequisite for action, it's the residue of repeated choices. That's the ultimate Stoic rebellion, refusing to let how you feel in the moment dictate who you become. Now the torch passes to you. Scroll down and declare one excuse you're retiring today, not with self-loathing, but with the quiet determination of someone who's recognized their own agency. Whether it's "I'm too old to learn" or "I'll start when I have more time," name it. Then do what the Stoics would. Light the fire of action so bright that excuses can't survive the heat. The world doesn't need more perfect conditions. It needs more people willing to build with whatever's at hand. Your philosophy isn't measured in words recited, but in excuses left